Okay. Hello, everybody. Before I start, I have to say that usually those architectural conventions are pretty boring. But I think you guys really knows how to put some enthusiasm into architecture. So that's very nice to see. Okay. Hello, I'm Chris. I'm an architect from Austria, and I just turned 4 years old as an architect. We founded our studio in 2014, and as a 4-year-old, we slowly developed how we can walk on our own feet, and we slowly start to speak our own architectural language. And also, like a 4-year-old, we have still this necessary naivety and positivity in the way that we take on projects where we not necessarily ask, is it profitable? But our questions are, is it possible? And as an architectural toddler, I'm not an expert in anything. You will see that our work is quite a big range, and I will talk mainly about how we steer in this architectural world as a toddler. So as a real toddler, I was growing up like this. Could you shrink the image a bit? So what you see here is a Ferrari. It's not a real one. My father was a carpenter, and he built this Ferrari for me when I was young. This Ferrari, I drove with it more than 100 kilometers per hour, and I accidentally killed 2 chickens. Oh, that's here. This is also a pretty good, whoever of you is in architecture is a pretty good analogy that before I studied architecture, I had a Ferrari and I had hair. But after, now in the business, I don't have a Ferrari and I don't have any hair anymore. Whoever is in architecture of you to make some money, I think you have to rethink that. In real world, I'm 34 years old now, and that is a little bit of a weird age for an architect because I'm 20 years too young to be unimportant, but I'm also 10 years too old to study anything else. So I am a young architect, which is in itself a little bit of a contrast, because usually you get very good as an architect between 50, in your 60s, or in your 70s. But a young architect is a bit of a weird place to be in. On the other hand, it is also very exciting to be an architect and young, because we are living in times where we have a lot of change. I think in all of our world there is a lot of change going on in the moment, and as architects, I think we have a very unique skill set to steer the world through this change. I think we combine, based on our skill sets, we combine business and creativity. We are a little bit like strategic dreamers. And I think that is very important skill set for a lot of industries that are in transformation, especially in the construction business. And I think because of our skill set, we should start to first change the construction business, because it has the most impact on our natural surrounding, the most negative impact on our environment. So it would be a pretty good place to start there. And I will elaborate on this thought a little bit later on. To talk a little bit about what is about to change, I want to go through a project in general in phases. I think every project can be divided into 5 phases. So it starts with the starting of a project. And this is a very beautiful thought, I think in architecture, that every project ever done started always the same way. It started with a pen and an empty paper. So the possibilities by then are still endless. And I think we heard a very good talk of Frank yesterday about this part. And I think that is really beautiful because it connects us in the present to all the history and all the past of builders who did our craft. The second part is the designing of the building, and I think there is a lot of change happening at the moment and in the last decade already. I think the tools we have now for architecture are very broad and very new, and that puts a lot of benefits towards you, towards the young architects, towards the architectural toddlers, because we should grow up with that, and we should learn that very early on, because then we have an advantage later on in the jobs. The third part is building a building, and also here there is a lot of change happening at the moment. New technology is coming in, new materials is coming in, rapid prototyping, CNC milling, 3D printing. And the benefit of that is that the designing of a building and the building of a building move much closer together. And we as architects are much closer than to the building, to the construction of a building. The third part is how we use a building, and I think there needs to be a lot of change in the future, and I will elaborate my talk a lot about this topic. And the fifth one is the deconstruction of a building. I think this is a very undervalued point in our craft, that we don't think of how are we actually deconstructing our architecture. Because we as human beings, we have a limited lifespan, but so do buildings. And I think we cannot afford anymore to bury very valuable resources under buildings. And I think this change needs to come, because the current way of how we construct our buildings is very insufficient. Our high-rises are mainly islands in the city. They consume a lot, but they don't give anything back. They are basically cores with very expensive real estate around it. And if this is our sense of architecture, I think that there is something wrong to it. I think a building needs to be more connected to an urban fabric. Because I lived a long time in Beijing, and I know the consequences what pollution, for example, have. At the moment, current construction industry is the biggest polluter in the whole world. The construction industry consumes more than 50% of all the world energy and produces more than 40% of all the greenhouse gases. And we are part of this. We are the biggest polluter on this earth. So I think it is on us young architects to somehow rethink what architecture can be, what construction can be. Because this one cannot be the solution of how we bring nature back into our cities. I asked a couple of days ago on Instagram, like, what would you like to hear when I give a lecture in Kerala and in Delhi? And a lot of you guys responded. I got a couple of hundred messages. How to start your own practice. I will talk a little bit about this today. Your journey so far will be also covered. I also will show some projects I've never published before. Some of them also in India. What is the task for a future generation of architects? We will talk about this. Architecture and food will be a big topic in my talk today. Modular architecture, natural architecture will be covered. The tools we are using, I will talk a little bit about that. Indian projects will be in there. How to clear your mind. We are all very busy people, so how to clear your mind is a very important part in architecture. I will also elaborate on this one, yes, afterwards. And I don't know if it's online, but in case you guys have a handy, you can also put it online if you want. So I was born on the 1st of October, which gives me a very bad ranking, 1 out of 10. But I'm a Libra. I don't believe in horoscopes, but there is one true thing to that I need balance in my life. After 5 years in Beijing, where we founded our office, we worked ourselves a lot into a burnout because this balance in architecture was missing. And this is a balance of that in projects itself. So we keep this balance by always working on 2 projects at the same time. One is a project that has a client. The other one is a project that is self-initiated. So we don't do a lot of projects anymore. So we try to keep there the balance of a project that deals with restriction, it deals with compromises, and the other one where you are free to create something because you feel that this is important for the future. I will cover both of those kind of projects today. And the second part is that I also try to create a balance in my life and in my work, that this is also in balance. I think we are all aware that architecture is not the most healthy job you can get. I actually think that architecture wear black not because of a minimalistic fashion statement. I think they wear black out of an emotional statement. I think we are all very, very sad inside because working 15 hours per day and being undervalued, that can make you depressive. But today I actually feel quite positive, so yeah, I wear white. But we try to create this balance by moving here. So we moved back to Austria, near where I come from, my wife and me, and we work and we live there. We live not in a city in Austria. We also don't live in a village in Austria. We moved to the mountain. We don't have any neighbors, and well, some cows are our neighbors, but otherwise than that, we are completely off grid, and that also cuts out all the pressure you feel what the city gave me, for example, in Beijing. So this was a very relieving thing for us to do. So when the weather is nice, we are mainly on the mountains and do skiing in winter, we go hiking in summer. And actually, if I could talk or give a lecture about this topic, it would be much more interesting. But today, it's about architecture, because if the weather is not so good, we have some time to do some projects. And about this, I'm talking today. So I gave now a little bit of an introduction of myself, where I'm coming from, how we are working, and I believe that this is also important because architecture is personal. So whatever your lifestyle is, wherever you're working, whatever your mindset is, where you're growing up, it influences of what kind of architects and on what kind of projects. The hands of this man are the hands from my wife's grandfather, and he's a bamboo craftsman. He makes a lot of baskets. So I was very early on influenced by the material bamboo. And this project I introduce now is called One with the Birds. It's a bamboo structure which was influenced by the tipis of Native Americans. What I like about this type of architecture is that it is very flexible. So people, they took it with them whenever their herd of buffaloes were traveling further, and all of the joints, they are tied. So that doesn't leave any harm on the material or on the site. And I like this sensible architecture, that you treat your natural materials the way that you can reuse them afterwards. So this is our interpretation of this flexible tipi structure. So a bamboo structure that is fully modular. It can be extended to the left, to the right, to front, to the back, and to the top, and connects people back to the nature. This is my father. My dad was not just a good carpenter, but he was also a crazy climber. He was famous for that he climbed everything without any security. So it was just him and the mountain. So there is no rope, no net, no nothing, just him and the mountain. And next time I should do a lecture just about my father. So my dad, he experienced our natural environment in a fully three-dimensional way. I think when we grew up, we did the same. We were climbing trees, we were in the nature, we were somehow one with the wildlife. When we get older, though, we are mainly still on the ground, and we discover it more in a two-dimensional way. So this project introduces people back to a three-dimensional way in a very natural building typology. So we use bamboo in a modular structural system to get people also to the height. This project is, for example, one of my our self-initiated projects. So we did a lot of testing. It was a very hands-on approach first, which was a bit weird for me because I'm coming from a school where the computer is heavily used, or was heavily used. So it was a very new thing to develop natural structures like bamboo. And working with bamboo needs to be a hands-on approach because the material itself is imperfect. So you cannot take this into consideration on the computer because computers are perfect, but doing something imperfect on a computer is much more work. So we took it on our own hands first to initiate the project. Could you also turn these lights a bit down? Thank you. So we funded the project by ourselves. We bought 1,000 bamboo canes, and we built first a structure by ourselves, our own team, because we wanted to see the structural capabilities of bamboo. What is possible? Where do we need to change the design? And so forth. All the joints, what you're seeing in this project, are all binded, so they're all tied together. So there is no metal, no screw used. Yeah, and here you see some of the ropes going through and connecting the whole structure to a building. After that, we redeveloped the structure, and we made out of a little structure, we made a product design. A product design much rather than an architectural architectural building. Because I don't like the business of architecture. I actually hate the business of architecture because it is not scalable. Architecture is an unscalable business. So, for example, if you work on a single family house, you maybe have 1 or 2 employees who work on this house. But if you get an airport, you hire 100 more people, they build the airport, but it's not scalable. Whereas if you design a product, it can be a successful product, like a chair, for example, and then it can be sold 1 million times. So this is a scalable business. We much rather think about architecture as a product design, if it's possible, than about a building itself. So this product design here is a very small unit. Then with a couple of more bamboo shots, you can build a small yoga studio or garden pavilion. This one is a little hotel structure with 5 rooms, or community spaces, but all with the same structural knot and joints. Here you see a little bit how the building is building itself up with the layers. So all of it is the same part, the same component, just scaled in height. The project is now under construction. One structure is already finished. The second one is coming up. This one is in Ecuador, on the coast, on the west coast of Ecuador in Ayampe. And they are building a small hotel with the structure, very community-based. So because it is like building up a billy shelf from IKEA. The joint is always the same, basically. So it just needs one joint, and you know exactly how to continue it. This is when the building is already a bit taller, with the roof and with the pots inside for sleeping. And the second one is coming up in Anhui County in China. And here we want to make a little bit of a different development, a more ecological development, that you plant a bamboo grove, and whenever you take out one cane of bamboo, you have to plant 2 more trees. So therefore, the forest around the development grows, and the development itself also grows. I'm not necessarily saying that bamboo needs to be introduced in our capitals, but if we think about that, the construction industry is the biggest polluter. I think it is on us that we are thinking about strategies that are more ecological than what we are having at the moment. The second part I would like to, what guides our work is the attribute modular. Modularity is a very important factor in our work. So the Chinese building history was funded with bamboo, especially in the south of China. In Austria, it is wood. So Austrians are very good wood craftsmen. It is therefore no surprise that this material everybody is talking about now, cross-laminated timber, was invented in Austria. It was invented in Austria 30 years ago. And it's basically cross-laminated, massive wood planks. And they can be used not just for single-family houses, how Austria used it now for 30 years, but they also can be used in high-rises. So you can finally build a skyscraper in wood. Because of this cross-lamination, the wood doesn't shrink and doesn't expand, which is usually the problem of higher structures with wood. Living in a wood building, of course, comes also with other benefits. So, for example, it is 4 times lighter than concrete. That means that you can build thinner. It is more resistant than to earthquakes because it is lighter. You get more square meters. So it has an economical benefit, but also an ecological. So, for example, people who live in wood houses have a lower heart rate. So wood is very good to use in architecture, but for now there was just the limit in height, and this material then changes it. For this project I introduced, it's called Toronto Tree Tower. It's a project in Toronto, and it was influenced by 2 projects. One was the Habitat 67 from Moshe Safdie in Montreal, which was, I think, one of the first ones who used prefabricated voxels to put into the structure. So the process of building was something completely new. He did it in concrete, which was far too heavy. I think 3 or 4 cranes actually crumbled under the weight. And on the other hand, the Bosco Verticale in Milan. And both of them somehow gave this inspiration for the Toronto Tree Tower. So we use also voxels, prefabricated ones, because it is wood, it is much lighter. And they are then prefabricated off-site, delivered to site, and then craned into place. So it is a kind of a new, not a new mentality basically to build, but a newly found mentality. And in the end, then to introduce trees back into the building. That the material for the building is basically then growing on the building itself. It's also during the winter when the trees they lose their leaves, there can sunlight come into the apartments. When it's summer and the trees are blossoming, it gives a natural sunshade then to the interior spaces. So it's basically a kind of a garden, but in the sky. And I really like to think of building in wood because I like this diagram that a natural resource like our sun is giving life to our natural materials, and they then can be processed with high tech into building planks, and after the life cycle of a building can be reused then and have a second life after the building is demolished. A third topic is cultural. I think cultural is for all of our work a very important topic. Victor Hugo said that back then, in ancient history, architecture was so important that it defined cultures. So it was language for people. It was language that got communicated throughout generations. I think that diminished then a little bit through industrialization, through modernism, but it used to be the main dominating art form, building. I think that came down a little bit. But for our practice, this still has a lot of relevance because we are in China on one hand and we are in Europe on the other hand. And both of them, without going too deep now into this, have a different heritage where buildings are coming from. And I think one of the most interesting part in our studio is that we can learn from this cross-cultural language. So caves were basically here now I introduced some projects, but I introduced them very quickly because I have a couple of those cultural projects we did in the last 4 years. The first one is a project that was inspired by the cave. The cave were our first apartments as human beings, but also our first museums, also our first galleries, and our first artworks were in caves. And this project, so the arch as a building typology, as a structural typology, is a reinterpretation of the cave itself. It's not just the logo of NASA, but also a reinterpretation of a cave. So sorry for copying your logo. So we use this arch as a language. We used it as a normal arch, but also as a cross, as a counter arch. And both of them then give into this interior a sense of a flowing ribbon. But nothing of it is double curved. It's all very easy to. It was all very easy to build. Actually, it was built from the first sketch to the opening. We just had 31 days. So this 1,000 square meter gallery was basically built in about 2 weeks on site. I think this applause was now for the 70 construction workers who were actually building it. Another project right next door belongs to the same company, to the same developer, and it's also an art space, but more of a lecture hall. So people should sit there and get inspired after they were in the gallery, and then listen to a lecture of the artist, for example. So we were contacted again and asked for designing a space where people can get inspired. We were thinking about Escher drawings, about Dali drawings, and it's basically again just a little box we inserted into the space, but with mirrors on all sides, so the arch gets then copied to infinity. And maybe it is then this place of infinity where all of our ideas or our creativity comes from. And people then sit in this space and are copied 1,000 times. I wouldn't want to see myself 1,000 times, but maybe with an audience, then it works. Another project is a little hotel in Beijing. It just opened last year. It is in the hutong areas, and we used a lot of those hutongs are now demolished. We used then the bricks from those hutong areas to rebuild a massive wall where the cutout of a traditional house basically is cut in. And then also in the interior, there are a lot of those volumes. So you're feeling when you're going through the hotel like you're going through a traditional hutong village, but in the inside. In the backside, this is me again, before architecture, because I have hair. And the wall where all the Mickey Mouse and so is on, it's my dad also built my whole children's room. And the wall you see there is actually a double wall, and it had another slide inside. It had secret compartments inside, what I found years later. So I grew up in a kid's room that offered a lot of curiosity for me, curiosity to look into things and discover architecture. And I think this this sense of discovering architecture never left me in a way. For this project, it's a apartment, a vacation apartment for a client of us near the skiing slopes in Beijing. Beijing has the Olympic Games in 2022, the Winter Olympics, and this is near the skiing areas. This sense of curiosity for people who visit, we also wanted to plan in there. So there are sometimes hidden rooms. When you go through a corner, you find some compartments you can open somewhere, so it is fully discoverable. And the space itself is inspired by an igloo, what you build out of snow. So it is built with a cold, seemingly material, but inside it is very warm. So, for example, all the heating pipes are going through those walls, so when you touch them, they are very haptic and very warm. And then everything is cutted with a contrast of wood, so a warm material and a cold material. In the same area, for the Olympic Games, we also were asked to design, together with Arup, with a structural engineer, bridge for the Olympic Games, and it uses the culture of the Olympic Games. Something which is also deeply rooted of not just the logo itself, but also attributes like openness, like inclusive, welcoming people. And we used basically the rings of the Olympic logo to create a structure for this bridge for the Olympic Games. From the side, the bridge looks like 3 mountains, so 3 arches. The bridge is called Sanshan Bridge, which means 3 mountain bridge. From the top, it's a DNA string, which resembles a little bit also sport, DNA, well, doping, something is there, I guess. And from the front, it's a very inviting gesture. So when you come close to the bridge, it opens up, and you're driving then through the circle across the bridge. A circle in Chinese culture, it has always something inviting. You probably all know Chinese gardens, for example. They have a circular opening for people, inviting them into their garden. Another cultural project, I'm not sure if I can say cultural, but which was inspired by a local culture, by a local vernacular, if you want, is in Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv has, on one hand, those beautiful Mediterranean architecture with very thick stone walls, very haptic arches as cutouts, so typical Mediterranean. And on the other hand, very well-preserved Bauhaus buildings. So if you would like to see Bauhaus buildings, the best way is to go to Tel Aviv. And we somehow merged this two, this haptic material on one hand, and the Bauhaus, the Bauhaus attributes on the other hand into one high-rise. This is called Tel Aviv Arcades. Again, it uses the arch as a symbol and the counter arch to create balconies outside, and in the setback then there are the apartments. Here's a look outside of the apartment. Here's how it's built up. I believe that it is an absolute nonsense to build glass towers in the south. I'm very much against to build just glass towers in the south because of because they overheat very, very easily. You put a lot of technical equipment in there, and I think we can learn then a lot from vernacular architecture that gives, for example, a layer on its balcony which shield off direct sunlight and makes it a natural ventilation then in the building itself. The first project I talk in India is in Hyderabad. This one was our second project we did in India, or are doing at the moment in India, and I was always very inspired by stairwells. I think, like as a typology, I think those are the most beautiful buildings in the world, stairwells. And so this building combines on one hand, or this design combines on one hand stairwells, on the other hand water mazes, and transforms both of them into a landscape design in Hyderabad. Here's a little close-up. It's for a company. It's for a developer called Puja Crafted Home in Hyderabad, and it's for a development of one of their developments there. A second project is very much inspired by Indian patterns. I love henna tattoos and. Okay. I could be wrong on this, but my impression is always that, especially in India, a lot of different creative industries very much combined by the pattern. So whether I look at, for example, tattooing, like henna tattoos, or clothing, or architecture, it's very much rooted, I think, into the same methodology, and I really liked it. I think in no other culture I find this closeness throughout a lot of different industries. So this is my sketch. It's a bit worse than Mr. Ching's sketch, so that's why I'm also not talking about sketches. But it gives you an idea what I wanted to create with this building. And a pattern that connects its facade, that connects a kind of a chaotic layer of nature on its facade, but with architecture then combined. So the pattern and balconies in this sense. So this is the pattern we created for the facade. It's basically just triangles and the building that comes out then in the background of those triangles. From a different perspective, again, the pattern is opening up. So when you see it a bit more from the side, the building is closing much more. So all of the tops are then covered with green roofs. Here you see a little build-up of the project. So on the bottom, it's a hotel. I also should say that. So on the bottom part, there's a large parking area. In India, the parking is really enormous, apparently. So we had to revise it 2 times, always double the amount of parking at the double amount of parking. Then there's a huge banquet hall in the center. It's a large lobby, and all the rooms then are on the outside. So when you enter the hotel, you come into a very large, quite dark, mysterious lobby, and then once you're looking outside, you're in a massive hotel, though. But with the balcony, it should feel more like a resort, because everybody has still on the balcony their own privacy. This one you see again from the street level. When you look towards it, it completely opens up, and from the side, then it closes a bit further. It closes, and when you look at it from the very side, you basically just see a green wall. I was very inspired by those boulders in Hyderabad. They are really beautiful. Oh, here you see the project again from the top. This one was on site for the next project I show. It's 2 boulders but stacked, and you have those big boulders everywhere, and I really loved them. And the client asked us to design some houses and like some villas. And I like to design villas, I'm okay with that. But he said, yeah, we need 50 villas. And I was quite shocked by that. I mean, I know it a little bit from China. And I saw the same thing in India than I saw in China. When you build villas, actually it's a house right next to the other one. And there is no difference between this house or the 50th on the other side. So this repetitive design approach, I was a bit against that. So I was a bit scared about this, and we tried to find some solutions of how we can build on plots where 50 are right next to each other and very small, how we can find a strategy that we still create some variety between all the houses itself. So inspired by the boulders, we went more vertical than horizontal. So each house consists of 4 vertical spaces, all arranged based on Vastu. And if you look at it, you don't really see that there is one really similar than the other one. Because gardens, trees are somehow give the whole master plan a variation then. Another topic of our office is responsive to create buildings that somehow respond to a certain plaza, to people in a way. I said before when I talked about the bamboo buildings that it has a heavy hands-on approach. And for me this was something new because I was coming from a university where we were taught in computers a lot. So we tried to do a project together with Coca-Cola to make people aware of plastic waste. So people could give back their empty cola bottles. We collected them, and they got one filled up cola bottle for free. So like that, we collected more than 17,000 cola bottles. And we wanted to make this one an artwork. And this artwork should be, like on one hand, a little bit like the swoosh of the cola logo, but also like a kind of a paper stripe. So I tried with the computer to somehow model a paper stripe. And I think it was like after the 4th day or so where I gave up. I just couldn't do it. Now I think I would know how to do it, but back then I had no chance. So I failed miserably. So then we said, yeah, why don't we just do a model? Like we did this one in 10 minutes. We gave it to the construction builders. They did this one in the next day. And the next day then the bottles were on. So I think that gives a little bit the impression that sometimes if we have very good skills on a computer, it's sometimes not really helpful to think too much with your computer, but also take a little bit more of a hands-on approach here or there. I think the fastest line or the fastest line between A and B is not necessarily the shortest line, but the safest line. And I think that also is something we need to learn in architecture, that not everything you can do with the computer, you should do with the computer. A responsive project, this one was our first project we ever got. It was a competition. We won this competition. It is in the middle, in the center of China, in a tier 2 city. And this one was the starting point in 2014 for our office, basically. It is an entrance gate. So this is a normal public plaza in China. I'm not sure if some of you have been in China already, but it doesn't matter where you go. If you go in the evening outside, you see this in a public plaza. People dance together. Community is still very big there. So our design was in between the city and the natural park. The natural park was a myrtle tree garden, so with huge and very old myrtle trees. Some of them were more than 1,000-year-old trees, and they have these pink flowers on top of them. And we wanted to create a little bit of a transition space between the city on one hand and the nature on the other hand. And this sound wave then was our main influence for this project, to have the noise of the city somehow fading out and turning slowly into nature. I said I'd talk a little bit about software as well, because although I said before that the hands-on approach is sometimes important, in this project it was very important to be also skilled with computers, because we had 700 different fins. They were all different in their profile, they were all different in their height, they were all different in their cladding. So we needed to draw 700 different elevations, 700 different sections, and 700 different plans. So doing things then with the computer is much easier. So I think all of those pack of drawings, it was in the end like a pack like this. We did basically in 2 days, just with a little script. I don't know. Oh, I don't have the script with me. but they got then all this package, they prefabricated all the fins, their name tag was already waiting on site, and they installed it. Oh, sorry. All the fins, they are perforated towards the top, and there is LED lighting inside the top. And it measures then on the plaza how much movement there is. So if people are there for dancing, it knows, okay, there is some movement going on. So if you would clap now with the drums and so this one would light very, very brightly. So it measures with sensor what's going on in the plaza and translates that then into architecture. And this is what I mean then with responsive, that architecture reacts to whatever is happening around it, and the people then respond back then to architecture. Another topic of us is flexible, to create flexible spaces. I go also through a couple of projects very quickly, in the end then a bit of a longer one. This one is a showroom, a workstation, and a think tank for Volkswagen, for the German car brand. They asked us to design their office headquarters in Beijing, the interior. And we wanted to create a very flexible space that can transform itself to whatever is the need and the demand of the space at the moment. So, for example, we have circular pots. All of them are divided into 3 parts, and all of those sliding doors can either open or close. And therefore, they can have meeting rooms, they can have showrooms, so they can play this in different variations. So, a truly flexible space. Another flexible project is a music hall in the south of China, and it also should be as flexible or as much variety as music itself has. And we created this space that the facade can fully open when there is an event happening, or it can fully close when nothing is happening. And the same flexibility also in the interior design. So when it's closed up, you have 3 different spaces, but if the demand is there, if there is a large concert, for example, or an exhibition, then it can fold down and more people then are integrated into one large space. A little side project we initiated by ourselves is a little vacation home. You close it up when you're not there, you open it up when you're there, and you turn it and create then 50% more interior space than you have before. We also work together with a company called Bigger TR, who is producing furniture for interior spaces. Real estate prices are rising, so I think it needs also for the interior design strategies of how you can build more function on smaller scales. And you also can bring this sense of flexibility also to our cities, that architecture itself can respond to what is happening in its surrounding. So, for example, this is the museum, the Bauhaus Museum in Germany, in Dessau, and it can react to different kind of things. So, for example, during the winter, it can close up the park, because the park during winter is more like a dead land. When there are public painting events or outdoor cinemas, it can turn their public, it can rotate their public areas to the right position. Or for public viewing for the Football World Cup when Germany is losing against Austria. Or as a backdrop on music festivals, for example. But that architecture is not something static, that's something rigid in the city, but it can interact with its surrounding. And this is also the starting point for this project. It's the first time I'm showing that project. When I think that flexibility is something extremely important for our generation. I think that our generation is more flexible than the generation of our parents, and I think the next generation will be more flexible than us today. So cheap air travel, for example, or the internet is connecting the whole world. I was able to open an architecture studio in Beijing, for example. My dad would not have been possible to do that, not because he was all the time climbing on mountains, but because it was just not a thing you did back then. And I think this flexibility of generation, it will go further. And architecture is in no way responding to any of these flexibilities of new generation. The main idea of this project came when my wife and me were looking for a house. So my dad, he died like 4 years ago now, and we moved back to Austria, my wife and me, to be closer then to my mom. We were trying to look for a house. But we had to think of all of those necessary uncertainties in a way. So we had to think, okay, how many children do we want to have? Maybe 2. Does my mom maybe one day live with us? Do we get a dog? Are we working from home? Do we have a home office? How many employees do we want to have? So all of this maximum of space, we already needed to take in consideration of doing a house when we bought it. So we thought, wouldn't it be nice if architecture can respond to all of those different life choices you make? Because your life is flexible. It changes from one day to the next. So why shouldn't architecture actually respond and adapt to all those changes? So for example, we took a look how many square meters each of us needs in what position of life. So for example, as a student, you can start with a very small one. And then you can grow your house when you get children and get smaller again when you get old. And this is how what the idea behind is. So there is a unit, which is basically 1.2 meters as a unit. A guy is buying it for his student dwelling. He meets a girl, they get married, so they move together. And after they move together, they get a kid, the first kid. Then the house extends again because their mom moves in and they get a dog, for example. And then the guy wins an architectural competition, thinks he's the best architect in the world, and builds his office on top, way over-motivated, and the project dies, has to reshrink to a normal size of a project, retires at a certain point, and when you get old, your knees don't work so well anymore, so you build a dwelling without any stairs, so a pavilion kind of structure. So your house is not something that is all the time there, the same way, and gets just less occupied over time once your kids are going to university or so, but can adapt to all different changes. And whenever you shrink it down, you can sell parts of your house, or you can buy new ones if you want to extend it. The main part of all modular projects is the joint. The most effort is always into the main joint, to develop a joint that works well in the most easiest way. It took us a lot of time, over a year, to develop this joint. And it's basically mounted then on the structure, the joint, so you stick the structure together, and then the structure, and then it has fillings. And all of those fillings, they can be very different ones. There's like, for example, you have an iPhone, and then there are developers who create some app for the iPhone, right? The same thing can happen to here. So you have your basic fillings like doors, louvers, walls, floors, etc. Stairs, for example, and then you can have different ones like Tesla batteries, bicycle stand. So there is a lot of industry for people to develop then as a third-party little fillings for the structure. And this is the base part, basically. It can come in wood or it can come in steel. You put it together as to the main structural element, the main beam. Then you get, of course, a little bit more beams, a close on the bottom, which is onto the foundation, on top of the foundation. This is the main joint then. We are talking here about a size of 1.2 meter for each beam. this is the main structure of the house, and then you basically add it up with different fillings. So solar panels on the roof and gardens for your home gardening. Everything of that should be very easy to build. So the main cost of houses are contractors. At least in Austria it is like this. And the main cost, but also the main corruption happens by hiring contractors and so forth. So to cut all this out, it should be very easy to assemble. It comes in a container. You pick up some friends of yours, and you can basically assemble it by yourselves and with your friends. A little bit of a larger structure then. This one is like one single family house now, with one family house with 2 bedrooms. And the main structure gets built first, and then all the fillings are coming into the structure. And whenever your life adapts or need to adapt to a certain lifestyle, you can add again. And a bigger one. I think that, like what we have seen in the last decade, for example, telecommunication was pretty much revolutionized, right? With the phone, etc. The internet. At the moment, mobility is getting revolutionized by Tesla, by the Hyperloop, by Uber, for example, maybe flying cars into the future. And I think that the main driving force of all of this one is collecting data. Data is our currency. But I think the most data is actually collected in the home. So I'm pretty sure that if Apple also is asking what will be the next big thing, I think all of those tech companies are moving into architecture pretty soon. So it might be that for them the next big thing is architecture. And I think all of us as a young generation of architects need to be prepared for this shift. And this might be one project that combines then technology with our construction industry. There is now a lot of movement in the smart home industry, but I think smart home is still pretty stupid. But it starts to be really smart when all the components are interacting with each other, when all of them, they are influencing and communicating with each other. And this could be a first step towards this direction. And now the last point for my talk, one of my favorite ones, all the projects that are dealing with healthy architecture, vital architecture, are the ones that are closest to my heart. That's my wife, Faye, in our yard. We are planting most of the vegetable we are consuming by ourselves. We try to live autark. We try to go just to the supermarket for toilet paper or other necessities, but all the food we try to produce by our own and harvest by our own. We also got involved in a startup from our friend Niklas. He has a pretty smart startup that grows vegetables in the verticality. So basically all of these ones are ropes that are hanging into water, and after some times you can grow salads, you can even grow pumpkin out of that. So you can have your vertical gardens also on a very minimum space. And I think there is a huge market for that, especially in the south, where it also then, a garden can also cool down the building in a very natural way. So these ones are the first tests we did with this system. This one is a farmhouse, a very traditional farmhouse in Austria, and I really like how a traditional farmhouse operated. So it had everything under one roof. So it has the stall on the right part of the house. It has an in-between part where all the heavy machinery was and all the working spaces were, and the living part and on the left side. We developed based on this typology of a house, a little house in Germany, which is called Yin and Yang House. One part is for living, one part is for working, and the top is for planting your own vegetable garden. So as you see, the site is very, very small. When you build a house then there is not so much room with the car entrance and so anymore for parking. So we planted the garden then on top. So one part is living and working both in harmony under one roof. You see a little bit the build-up of the house itself. So both parts are connected in the interior with each other, but you also can connect to the other part then on its roof. The inside, and you see the garden in summer, but in winter it's also a good time or a good slope then for the Germans to train a little bit skiing. And here the garden on the top. Basically, this is a very important topic for our firm. So how to connect food with architecture. We are doing now a lot of projects which are just dealing with that. So this one is, again, a self-initiated project. So there was never a client for this project. But there was also never a client, for example, for the bamboo project I showed in the first, as the first project. We just published it, and then afterwards we got clients who wanted to build it. So I think it shifted a little bit the notion that clients are coming to you, but I think you also can take the initiative to get your own projects after publishing. So this project I show now combines this notion of how we can deal with agriculture on one hand and how we can deal with architecture on one hand, because both of them are very insufficient at the moment, especially agriculture. I will talk a lot about agriculture in a moment. So this one is a generic tower, let's say. Everybody of us as an architect is happy if a client is coming to him and say, let's design a building like this. You are really happy if he lets you do a green facade. If he lets you do that to integrate gardens in between, you probably hug him. But I think it gets very interesting if a building does that. So that our nature and the building really live in symbiosis, and both can benefit from each other. So the project itself started as an answer to the refugee crisis we had in Europe 2 years ago. So we wanted to build, made out of CLT, or cross-laminated timber panels, very easy to construct buildings. So the triangle is the easiest way you can structurally construct a building. The inside are living spaces, the outside are gardening units. Here you see all the modules that are involved in the further designs. So everything again is modular. You can extend it in every direction. And this one is the base shed, a very small apartment for a refugee. It has then refugees were not allowed back then in Austria to work for a living. So they could work, for example, on their own home, though, as a gardener, and maybe sell some of their vegetables to the people, and there it gets already the first interaction. As I said, when their family, for example, then move with them, you can extend it in every direction. So this one is a little bit of a larger one, or with greenhouses for the winter. This one is already a little townhouse for 4 families. Oh no, this one is still for 1 family. So not anymore a refugee home, but something something more maybe for an urban environment. This one is a little townhouse, which is for 4 families already, and all of the families then have on the facade a lot of space to grow their own vegetable. Good benefit is also that the green, of course, is cooling down the building naturally. And student dormitories. Where it gets really interesting, though, if you bring this idea to the high-rise, to the verticality of our cities. Because I think that, as I said earlier, when we build a tower, they are mainly they're mainly islands in the city. So their connection they have to their environment, it ends at the doorman. And I think that is very bad for buildings, how they interact with people on a street level. Kimball Musk, I talked now a little bit about agriculture. Kimball Musk said that food is the new internet. And I can really relate to this statement because food is a $5 billion industry. And there is a lot of problems with the food we are currently consuming. And it continues like that. In the next 30 years, there will be more food consumed than in the last 10,000 years combined. So I think that the current way that the countryside is growing the food for the city, that doesn't work anymore. I think the city needs to be part of our food production in the future. And I think that this notion that we change that, this needs to change. This needs to happen in our head, because agriculture at the moment uses 70% of our drinking water. It is a big threat to biodiversity because we are mainly growing corn worldwide to feed cows, so we can eat a lot of beef, and to support our current lifestyle. So it's a big threat to biodiversity, and this is just not healthy for our natural environment. And I think to make a change can happen first that we try to eat local, that we try to eat regional, and if we don't have the space for growing our own vegetables, then at least that we support local farmers to grow their vegetables. But I also think that as people, we need to take back the ownership of our food. At the moment, all of our food belongs to maybe 5 big, huge corporations like Monsanto or Nestle or Bayer, for example. So all of those are big chemical corporations who own all of our food. But I think that good or real food is not a luxury. It's not a commodity. It's a basic human right. So I think this notion that we have to take care of our own food, it needs to go back into our heads. On the other hand, then also, if you plant vegetables in your private balconies, it also cools down the building in the natural ventilation. The city already produces a lot of energy. That means that the city produces a lot of heat already. And warmth is good for certain vegetables like tomatoes, nut trees, beans, and so forth. And all of this the energy can be reused, basically, to grow your vegetables on the facade and to cool down the building. And in this way, also, the building itself is not anymore an island in the city. It connects to the city, because whatever is produced on the top of the building, it can be given to a larger community. It can be sold to its surrounding. So the connection is passing past the doorman. And I think that is a very beautiful way of maybe how we can coordinate and agriculture and architecture, and maybe both of those industries can benefit from each other. I want to end my talk on a positive note, on a very positive note. So, a lot of change, I think, is happening to architecture, and it is a very exciting time actually to be a young architect. But when I was a student, it was not so excited, and I was a little bit overwhelmed by architecture. And maybe this example tells you why, and maybe a lot of you can find yourself in that as well. So when I was a kid, when I was very small, I got from my parents a little book, and it was a zoom-out book. So it started with 3 triangular shapes. And then the next page, it zoomed out one step further, and you saw that those triangular shapes were actually the rooster, the comb of a rooster. And then you zoomed out one more step, and you saw that there are 2 to kids who were looking at this rooster, and you zoomed out and you saw that actually it was just a magazine cover on the table of a guy who just had dinner. And it zoomed out with every page until you saw from the last page, you saw the moon, you saw the Earth from a moon's perspective. And I think that this is, when you're studying, you see that, you see architecture as well like this. So you see that you're being in an industry that connects the whole past of builders, all the tradition, all the vernacular, all its history. And somewhere there are you as a small student who is looking at all of this and are totally overwhelmed by the grandiose appeal what architecture has, and it's very hard to find your way in it. But I think the good thing is, or what I truly believe is, that real change happens in those pages in between. So it doesn't happen on the last page, it happens on all these little pages in between. And this architectural platform, our play field, through new technology, through everything that is coming into architecture, is now so big to play, so everybody of us can find our own niche, our own little page in this. And if we make a little contribution or an innovation or inspire people on our little page, that might change then this last view where somebody is viewing from the moon towards the Earth. And I think that that seeing architecture that way helped me a lot to guide my young age through our industry. And I truly am excited now to be very young and an architect, and I still want to stay as long a toddler as somehow possible. And my puberty can wait. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
And now, it's time for the interactive session. Please raise your hands to pose your question. A mic will be brought to you.
Meanwhile, before the question are coming, I'm taking a photo of you guys, okay? I'll link you then on Instagram. Otherwise, if you guys have any questions, I'm also you also can post them on Instagram. So I usually respond to questions, so I can also answer there.
Hello, Chris. Hi.
Hey.
Yeah. So I met you yesterday also. I've been following you for the last 2 years on Instagram. So can you tell us about the softwares that you use, because many of us here want to know about it more, and the presentations were really good. So
yeah,
it will help us a lot.
Yeah. I actually don't think it matters what software you use. I think all of the softwares are very, very good at the moment. You know, if you like one software, you can use those. I think what is good to learn is Rhino, because it is very international at the moment. I think a BIM software is pretty good if you try to find a job. I never got really into BIM. We're using it for a couple of projects now, but you know, like mainly in China or so, BIM is not that advanced yet. But as a Grasshopper and Rhino we use a lot. For renderings, we switched to Cinema 4D. But this is just a preference of mine. I worked with Cinema 4D now since 12 years or so, no, 15 years. So I always worked it, and I introduced it into our team. It's very easy to render, but 3D Max, Maya, they all can do basically the same. So it's just a preference what you like to choose. Okay, guys, thank you. Thank you.